Welcome to Grazing Along series, the Forage Nexus initiative to celebrate the National Forage Week. I'm Marcelo Valal, Forage Extension Specialist with the University of Florida.
I'm Lilian Silva, Forage Specialist with Clemson University.
And I'm Bruno Pedreira, the Forage Specialist with the University of Tennessee.
So the National Forage Week is an effort from the American Forage and Grassland Council to raise awareness to the importance and impact of forages in the world. To help us celebrating, we've chose those ecosystems. We brought together a distinguished group of colleagues to share some different perspectives on the big picture of forage production systems, and to discuss how those forages and grazing will be integral part of the future of sustainable agriculture. Liliane, introduce our guests.
So today we have Dr. Lynn Sollenberger here. So Dr. Sollenberger got his degrees from Pennsylvania State University and University of Florida. And he has been with University of Florida for a few years now. And he is a fellow of multiple societies, including the Crop Science Society of America and American Society of Agronomy as well. And maybe one of the major roles that he has is our former advisors and mentors here for all of us here. So it's a pleasure for us to have him here today. And so we are going to get started then. So Dr. Sollenberger, just to get things going, we would like to open up with really talking about why the forage systems are so important throughout the world. So if you could share your thoughts with us, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Liliane, and it's good to be with you all today. So one of the first things I think we think about when we consider grasslands and forages is simply their scale. So they occur on a massive scope on a global basis. These statistics vary from source to source, but generally somewhere around 40% of the Earth's ice-free land area is thought to be forage and grasslands. And just to give maybe, if you like, numbers, that's around 40 million square kilometers, or if you think in English units, about 15.5 million square miles. And to me, those numbers don't mean much. So if you think about it in terms of land mass, that's about 4 times the land mass of the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. And it's about 1.3 times the land mass of the continent of Africa. So that just puts in perspective the scale of the grassland resource throughout the world. So that's an important thing to think about, is whatever we do in a grassland context has implications over a large land area. There are also some attributes of grasslands that make them very important. And some of those relate to kind of the overall ecosystem context. So just a couple things that I would highlight is that many grasslands are habited by perennial species. They provide near continuous soil cover, and they're characterized by a rather massive below-ground biomass presence. And we won't go into all the gory details of why those things are important, but perennial grasslands are major drivers of soil organic matter, and we'll no doubt refer to soil organic matter again throughout this conversation. They provide near continuous soil cover, which, if you think about all of the contributions of grassland, that one is one of the most important, because it is a major protector of soil, nutrients, water, and the better job we do in achieving year-round soil cover, the greater positive impact we'll have on the overall environment. And then there's what's going on below ground, which is hugely important. Grasslands, unlike many of our annual row crops, allocate a large percentage of their biomass, typically more than half, below ground. And that has a major role in driving accumulation of soil organic matter and soil carbon. So Marcelo, I think you have a couple of slides that you can share, and I'll just quickly highlight a few of those points with some visuals.
Here we go.
Okay, so this first one looks at rainfall runoff comparing cultivated annual cropland with pasture land. Pasture land is yellow, cultivated cropland in red. I think it's pretty obvious what's going on there, but clearly pasture land minimizes rainfall runoff, increases the amount of rainfall that penetrates into the soil, and that has major implications for soil erosion, soil nutrient loss, soil sediment loss to above ground waterways. Next slide. This refers specifically to soil erosion losses. These were data that were taken in a number of different years. Dr. Carlin worked out of Iowa State University. And again, you can see the important role of pasture land in minimizing soil erosion. Next. Question might be, why are grasslands so capable of holding soil in place, minimizing runoff, and so on? Clearly, above ground biomass is really important for deflecting raindrops and the energy of rain and encouraging water to penetrate into the soil. So you can see that in this pot on the left. But on the right is the root system that was associated with that single plant on the left. And that gives you some sense of the proportion of biomass that is below ground and the way in which grasslands hold soil together and reduce soil erosion. Next. And just to compare an annual system, which is corn, sorghum, rye, which is in white, with a forage system, year-round forage system that includes a perennial grass, in this case Bermuda grass, looking at nitrate and nitrogen losses to shallow groundwater. That perennial system and that year-round active root system plays a major role in driving down nutrient leaching losses to the environment. That's the last one that I have there, Marcelo.
So that's interesting, Dr. Sollenberger. So let me jump in here. I think for all of us that have been studying forages, right, that's a clear statement. We can see the role of forage in the role of grasslands in the whole world. But there are some misconceptions from the general public about the livestock production systems, sometimes with the industry as well. So, in your opinion, how we are going to deal with it? How can we bridge these gaps of knowledge in between what we believe and what we have in terms of science, and how we can sell the idea that forages are here to really help us?
Right. So, I interact with students, general public, producers, the whole gamut. And particularly as I talk to my undergraduate students, some of them have some agricultural background, some of them do not. But one of the things that I try to kind of develop with them, not necessarily focusing on numbers so much, but just focusing conceptually, is to try to help them understand how ruminant systems and grasslands work. One of the things that they don't really understand is the proportion of forage that is in a ruminant diet. And so many of them think about ruminant diets as composed of, maybe 60 or 80 or 90% of grain crops. And they're very concerned about the competition of ruminants with humans for edible food. So one of the things I try to establish very early on in that process is that globally, there's a huge range of land resource types. And we typically find ruminant animals on those land types where we cannot grow crops that are utilized by humans. And so that land area, which, we talked about the scope and the size of that land area, but it really doesn't have a lot of application to growing human edible food. And so that's an important issue for them to understand, that it's not kind of a choice of ruminant animal versus human food, but it's making efficient use of a resource. If we were to remove ruminant animals from that landscape, that wouldn't necessarily result then in a direct conversion of land to growing corn or other human edible foods. One of the things that they don't really understand also is that many of them have heard that the conversion efficiency from grain to gain, in other words, how efficient an animal converts a feed source into an animal product, is very low for ruminant animals. And if we're talking about grain, that's actually not a misconception, that's true. But if we think about the proportion of animal diets, ruminant diets particularly, that are grain, beef cattle production systems in the U.S., we generally think in terms of those animals over the course of their lifespan, 80 to 85% of the protein and energy they consume is from forage. So that leaves a very small proportion of their diet that is actually what we would consider to be human edible. For a dairy animal, that number in terms of the percentage of forage is somewhat less, because to achieve the levels of production that we want out of those animals, we need to feed them a little more concentrate. But so it's really important to understand that ruminant animals consume diets that are very high in forage, and the land where we utilize to produce ruminant animals typically cannot be used very effectively. And in fact, in many cases, if it were used to produce other types of food crops, it would have a major negative impact on the environment in terms of erosion and other losses to the system. So those are a couple of conceptual ideas that I find are generally not well understood by the public at large, and even by some of my own students in a forage science and range management class.
So you mentioned the importance of the livestock also to or the grazing to maintain some of those ecosystems going, and we're thinking about on the production side, but there is the whole other social and cultural importance of those livestock forage and livestock production systems. And I remember fondly learning about those in your class, in your graduate class, about how important those systems are for many people in the world. And sometimes we have a hard time relating because our reality here in the United States, it's quite different. But those animals are more than just the production. They are the livelihood, they are the bank, they are the culture of those people.
Yeah, that's right. And so I approach this from a couple of ways. One, I think about this from an ecosystem services perspective. So one of the ecosystem services is, and I should define an ecosystem service as simply something that an ecosystem provides that is of benefit to humans. And one of those types of ecosystem services is provisioning, which are those animal products that we typically think of. Others are regulating and supporting services that contribute to the overall functioning of the grassland ecosystem. But then there's a category called cultural services, and those services get at some of the things that you're talking about. And I am one of those low percentage of North Americans who have an agricultural background. And those of us who come from the land, so to speak, understand the connection with the land and with the culture of agriculture. And that is really, when I return to the area where I grew up in South Central Pennsylvania, it is somewhat of a spiritual experience for me, simply being back on that land. There is such a connection with that place that I can almost feel it drawing me in. like I said, I can't describe it really in any other way other than kind of a spiritual sort of experience or a connection with the land. So that, that's part of this cultural experience. And also, I think those of us who have worked in agriculture, we recognize that when we interact with others in the agricultural community, there again is that connection with a lifestyle, a way of living, a way of thinking, a way of doing things. And that connection is very strong within the grassland ruminant animal context. I think of perhaps the Texas type of connection between cattle and land, and the way in which that affects culture and interpersonal dynamics. So there is clearly that aspect that if you maybe don't have quite that same connection with grasslands or with agriculture in general, you may not recognize.
What do you see as one of the main challenges we face nowadays in the forage workers world to progress or to keep those grasslands as important part of the future of sustainable agriculture?
Yeah. So, one of the challenges, and I've faced this throughout my career as I have tried to communicate with people who are not necessarily connected to grassland agriculture. They may even have some pretty good concept of agriculture in general, but in some ways, grasslands are the underappreciated component of agriculture. And I think society at large really has very limited understanding of how important grasslands are to the overall ecosystem. So I think communication within the context of not just broader society, but within agricultural communities, of the important roles that grasslands play that go well beyond simply, a cow eating grass and providing meat or milk, is a really important aspect of what we need to continue to do, and you're trying to do with a conversation like this one. Also, within the context of funding agencies, with university systems, and within the political system at large, I think there's an underappreciation for the role of grasslands and grassland scientists and practitioners. So part of what we do, I think, is to put that in a context that can be appreciated by some of these folks. I tried to do that recently in something that I wrote for a kind of a general audience. And I said that one of the really cool things about working in grassland agriculture is that grasslands have this very long list of attributes that are beneficial to the overall ecosystem. But yet there are these pieces like greenhouse gas emissions from ruminant animals, like poor grazing management that can result in erosion and soil loss and environmental degradation, that are in tension with the benefits that can come from grasslands. And so if we understand the scope of grasslands, and if we bring as an overlay those tensions between the potential benefits and the potential detriments, there's a lot of opportunity there as researchers, as educators, to try to drive the process toward the ecosystem services and away from the ecosystem disservices. And I make the argument that if we can create an understanding of how to do that among our students, among our practitioners, society at large, we can begin to make those incremental steps that, when considered over time and when considered over 40 million square kilometers have a huge potential beneficial impact to big issues like climate change and a whole range of other environmental issues.
And if we bring this idea towards the whole systems, thinking about the food systems overall, Dr. Sollenberger, I think grasslands as well will have a really nice role when we are thinking about crop systems as well, right? Most of the crop systems we developed in the last few years, we have been working towards monocultural systems, and corn and beans and wheat after each other. And at some point, you already, mentioned a little bit about this, all of this carbon that we can bring through forage from the roots, and each of our forage plants will have a bunch of roots below ground as well. So if we go along these lines that we were talking here with you, can you see more of integrated systems as well in the future? Can you see the role of grasslands and forage as plants that will come back to our cropping systems to help us to make everything more sustainable from now on?
Right. So, I think clearly, I'm old enough that I've kind of spanned the generation between when integrated systems were widely practiced and were the primary mechanism of agricultural production in the U.S. That's what I remember as a kid, to the shift toward very highly specialized systems and monocultures, and now to recognition of the problems associated with those kind of systems and potential for transition back. So, I think clearly there is sufficient understanding of the importance of those integrated systems, whereby maybe the waste products of one component of the system become a valuable source of benefit to some other component of the system, and we create what has been referred to as circular systems where the components follow in a nice sequence and provide mutual benefit. So I think the science and the understanding is there, and now the application to that and the adoption of that is the challenge going forward, because we have a whole generation or maybe two generations of producers who grew up with the concept of highly specialized monoculture systems. And so the transition after two generations, that's a challenge to break those patterns and get back to or change to something that is more sustainable and has some definite potential, but does require perhaps a broader range of knowledge and understanding.
For sure.
So, Dr. Sollenberger, we're probably close to wrap up here. So, one last question that I would like to ask you, and really recognizing that this is going to be watched by a large audience that might have general backgrounds, and considering everything that we talked about here in terms of challenges and possibilities that we have on the grassland world, what would be your final message for this audience that will be watching today?
Right. So I think, one of the things that I observe that really relates to the attractiveness of grassland ecosystems in the current context in which we live, which, depending on where you are, but in many cases is an increasingly urban context with many fewer areas of kind of natural resource, natural habitat. And within that context, and this relates back to kind of a little different slant on the cultural contributions of grasslands. But I know just within my own family, there's a huge interest in getting away from very developed settings and into more natural ecosystems where wildlife predominate, where birds and butterflies and other pollinators and so on are abundant. And so there is, I think, that piece that grasslands, sheer magnitude of size, all the potential contributions to agriculture, but there's a huge role in terms of providing cultural benefits to Joe Public, whoever that might be. And it's a great place where we can watch deer and wild turkey and observe birds and listen to identify our favorite birds, whether they be bluebirds or whatever they are, that are very common in a grassland context. So the diversity of services that grasslands provide, I think, are somewhat unique and offer something to almost everyone.
Well put. And I just want to wrap this up with a phrase that really inspires me. And I think many of the forage world people are familiar with the Praise of the Bluegrass by John James Ingalls. And this was written in 1872, replicated multiple times, including in the Yearbook of Agriculture, 1948, and Rangeman Journal and more. But he says that grass is the forgiveness of the nature, her constant benediction. Fields trampled by battle, saturated with blood, torn with the roots of cannons, grow green again with grass, and the carnage is forgotten. And he goes on to say that grasslands don't produce any fruits in earth or air, and yet should the harvest fail for a single year, famine would depopulate the world. And that highlights the importance at that time of the bluegrass and the prairies to the United States agriculture, but also as a reflection of the grasslands in the world. Dr. Sollenberger, thanks for joining us. Thanks for opening this Grazing Along series, the Forage Nexus initiative to celebrate the American Forage and Grassland Council's National Forage Week.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sollenberger.